Hello and welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Sales. I'm Kasey Jones.
And I'm Ashleigh.
And today we are super excited to be with Reuben Swartz, the founder of Mimiran, the CRM for people who hate selling. Plus, he is host and chief nerd of the Sales for Nerds podcast. We love being nerdy about sales and, well, just about everything. So we're excited to have Reuben join us. Welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. Excited to be here.
Yeah. So we were just talking a little bit about the fact that you didn't start in sales. And we have a little bit of a trend on our show. Some of our most favorite guests, they start doing something completely different and are almost reluctant to get into sales and sort of fall into it for one reason or another. And we love the fact that gives them some unique perspective and also helps kind of reshape the sort of discourse around sales. We obviously are on a mission to kind of elevate the profession and the profession's reputation. And we don't like the fact that some people immediately go to Wolf of Wall Street and Glengarry Glen Ross when they think of sales. We would rather have people think of,
Pursuit of Happiness.
Happiness, right?
Tommy Boy.
It feels more real and more human and more empathetic and more impactful. So just to kick things off, tell us a little bit about your journey into sales and how that all came about.
Sure. I'll try to recap. And I guess to say I was reluctant would be a big understatement. As a software guy, my involvement with sales was usually like, wait, you promised what? That I would then be responsible for? And so it really wasn't, let's just say, a strong, positive, emotional relationship as far as I was concerned. And then in my head, I also had all these images like Glengarry Glen Ross type person. And we can all relate to moments where we've had a lousy sales experience with some pushy, smarmy, slimy salesperson. And that's kind of how I thought of the whole profession, which really wasn't fair or accurate, but that's kind of like the loudest voices are the ones that stick in your mind, even if they're not truly representative of everything. And so this is going to sound crazy, but I started a consulting firm doing sales and marketing consulting for the Fortune 500 as somebody with really no sales or marketing expertise. But I had a lot of background in pricing, and that was kind of touched on all the sales and marketing. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I actually have to sell stuff. And first of all, I had a lot of newfound respect for the salespeople, right? I didn't necessarily always agree with everything they did, but I was like, wow, this is really hard. And I did everything wrong. I tried to be like those high-powered enterprise salespeople that worked at the company I worked at, that I saw in the airports when I was going to my clients, and I read books and whatnot. And I learned a bunch, but it just made it even worse. I hated it even more. And it was like something that I would force myself to do because I had to do it. But it was so awkward because I always felt like I was in Glengarry Glen Ross. And it took me a long time to sort of realize that I was putting all these obstacles in my own head, that I didn't have to do it that way. That if you're a quota carrying rep number 8,063 for IBM or whatever, like there might be a certain way that you do sales. But if you're out there selling your own stuff that you're responsible for implementing, you can do it any way you want, right? You don't have a sales manager, you just have clients and prospects. And so what if instead of selling, I would just go help people? And it sounds so dumb now, but really just flipping that word around in my head made all the difference for me. It's like, I like to help people. I'm curious. I want to know what's going on. What do they really need? Am I the person that can give it to them? Are we the firm that can give it to them or not? And everything got so much more natural. And it took me years to kind of actually implement this, but just changing that mindset was everything. And I think that's something that I really like about what you guys are doing with the other side of sales and what I'm trying to do with Sales for Nerds as well. It's like, almost everybody started somewhere else and ended up in sales by accident. Very few people grew up saying, I want to go into sales, because it's got a bad reputation. And what I think of it now is, in the old days, if you were a salesperson, most of your job was giving people basic information and taking orders. And now we have computers to do all that stuff. So the only reason we're here as salespeople is we need to help folks with stuff that they can't do themselves. That's what our job is as salespeople, as far as I'm concerned. And that's kind of fun.
Couldn't agree more. And I love calling that out and calling out just that you're right. It's a silly thing, but it makes a huge difference. And we see this a lot, especially people who are reluctant to get into sales. You know, maybe they took a sales job or they took a transfer because they kind of had to or whatever else, but understands like sales is more about helping than it is about manipulation and tactic. And it's, you know, it really struck a chord with me. I mean, you say nobody comes into this. If anyone was going to grow up thinking they were going to be in sales, it should have been me. My dad was in sales. I saw this day in and day out, but I had the opposite reaction. I'm never going to be that. 2 years in the Great Recession had me thinking otherwise, but things change. And the other thing I think that's interesting and that I'd love to hit on here, especially as and if anybody who's listened to this podcast extensively knows that Ashleigh is just a bit of a nerd herself in her personal life. I think the other thing that's really cool is leaning into this sales for nerds idea, because one of the things about kind of nerd culture is a really strong emphasis on science and data and understanding the why of how things work. And sales is the ultimate study in my mind of how humans work. It's, you know, aside from like actual anthropology and sociology and stuff like that, it's really all about engineering human relationships so that you can help the most people possible with your product in the least amount of time. So kind of all of that is context. I mean, explain kind of how leaning into that nerd background, that science, that software developer background, like how has that strengthened you as a salesperson now that you've got this background in pricing and all this stuff, and now you're selling your own services? How has that helped you?
Sure. I think at the beginning, it always seemed bad, right? Like the salespeople were extroverted. We all have that stereotype. And I would get brought out on sales calls to answer the deep technical questions that the client needed answers to, but the salesperson couldn't answer. And I kind of saw the different dynamic, and I was like, I am not this person. Look at how nice their shoes are, et cetera, et cetera. And so for a long time, I thought, well, you know, I'm just not that person. And I tried to be when I was selling. And I realized later that just because you have these sort of dominant cultural examples of what a salesperson is, there's tons of salespeople out there, many of them we might interact with every day, that you don't think of as a salesperson, right? You go and you talk to a waiter at a restaurant. That's a salesperson. And some of them you can tell are trying to sell you the daily special and the expensive wine and all that. And some of them are there to make sure that you know that if you order that appetizer, you'll really like this other thing, and so on and so forth. And they're just taking care of you. You never feel like you're being sold. And I realized that, hey, I actually know a lot about what I do. And if I got in a conversation with someone and forgot that I was quote unquote selling, we'd have a great conversation. And they knew that they were talking to someone who cared, somebody who had expertise, someone who could help them, someone who would point them in the right direction if someone would be better positioned to help them. Right. And then if I got sales in my head all over again, it would screw things up and I'd get all awkward and not do things right. And finally I was like, okay, well, what would happen if I walked into a doctor's office and felt like the doctor was trying to sell me on the most lucrative procedure for them to do? Like, you know, you could take 2 of these and call me in the morning, but let's try heart surgery because I get a big commission on that, right? We would feel terrible and would run out of there and try to find another doctor. And I think a lot of salespeople give off the vibe of, you definitely need heart surgery, versus if trying to think of as a salesperson, what if I acted a little bit more like a doctor, right? I'm going to do a lot of diagnosis. I'm going to listen a lot. I think that's sort of part of the nerdy aspects. Like, we're problem solvers. So let's understand what the problem is first. And a lot of times the more extroverted folks can't keep quiet. They're just so excited. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad people or anything like that, but there's a huge advantage to being able to ask a question and let someone unload their data to you. And then ask another question, and ask all the right diagnostic questions first before you start prescribing things.
I love the way you're putting all of this. And especially sort of kind of the emphasis on like finding your own sort of authentic way of being a salesperson. And because people see through bullshit, like people spot bullshit really, really fast. And sometimes they want the thing that you're selling. And so they kind of let it slide and they don't really care. But if it feels really disingenuous, people are just going to recoil. And it's funny, I work with a lot of early stage startups and I work with a lot of technical founders who have to sell their product themselves when they're first getting going. And I've watched people go through the exact same process that you have, where at first they're like, oh, I got to be like the sales guy. And so they think that they've only seen sales from the outside. And so they think that it is this like pure instinct kind of thing. And they're trying to shoot from the hip. And they don't realize that even those super extroverted salespeople, the ones that are good, they have super defined processes. They have a method. It's not pure shoot from the hip. It's actually kind of thoughtful, and it's in line with who they are as a person. But we don't always talk about it that way when we're kind of talking about sales and salespeople from a distance. And I'm curious, as you started to figure out, one, that mindset shift, which I think almost everything in life to be successful, or if you're getting tripped up in something, it's a mindset thing, right? But I'm curious, what were some of the sort of aha moments where you're like, oh wait, I don't need to do it like this? And what were some of the things that helped you develop your way of doing it? Like, what did you test? What did you try? How did you approach that whole process?
Yeah. And I would really love to have like the detailed step-by-step, unfortunately, year-by-year progress that I've made, because it's all so hazy. And really my whole mission now is to help other people not have to spend a decade learning this stuff the way I did.
Yeah.
But some of the key highlights were, I think, the switch to helping was really important. And then you hit on a big one just now, which is a great segue, the bullshit, right? So much of it is bullshit. Yeah. And it may not necessarily be bullshit for someone else, right? There are people who walk into the room and they're high-fiving and they're doing this and that, and they're acting like Glengarry Glen Ross, but they're great ethical people who are helping their clients. They just have a different personality.
Yeah.
But that's not me, right? And then there are other people who are even shyer and more introverted than I am, who have their own way of having to deal with things. But I think you're absolutely right. We have to be able to do sales in a way that's still true to ourselves, partly so we don't go crazy. Yeah. That's the most selfish. It's not even to make more money. It's because it was so stressful to pretend to be this other person. I would go do sales for an afternoon and my back was all knotted and it just felt terrible.
It's exhausting.
It's exactly right. And now it's like, I do so much more sales than I ever did before, but I don't actually do any sales.
Yeah.
So I have a great time. I have great conversations with people. Sometimes we end up with an exchange of money. Sometimes we don't. But I get at the end of my day and I'm like, I learned a bunch of stuff. I love learning. It was a lot of fun. So realizing that I didn't have to mask myself with the bullshit was really helpful. So yes, I have to dress professionally and in line with what the client or prospect's expectations are, but I don't have to look like I'm trying to play a salesperson in a movie, right? I can walk in and take my laptop out of a backpack. I have this like really fancy leather laptop bag I used to cart all over the globe. And it's like one of those fancy things that all the salespeople had. So I bought one and put my ThinkPad in it and all that. But it's like, it leaves a mark on your shoulder after you walk through the airport for a long time. And I'm like, why am I doing this? I can just wear a backpack. No one cares. And then in what you're saying, it's just like, if you were my friend, how would I talk to you about solving this problem?
Yeah.
Right. And we may not be friends, but what's wrong with me talking to you like a friend? How would this conversation be different? Because it would be a lot more exploratory, a lot more open on my end about, gosh, here's some things that we need to think about that could throw this whole thing into disarray. Let's make sure we've got a plan. And if we can't, let me recommend where you should go instead. And it's just a totally different feel for how you interact. And that even extended to the website, right? When I threw up my first consulting website, I was pretending I was like some big important consulting company. Mm-hmm. And I would look at like the McKinseys and the other big consulting companies of the world, and I'd be like, oh, my website should have a whatever, right? It was a bunch of bullshit. I mean, half of those big websites are bullshit, even for those companies, but especially for me, like pretending to be a big firm, it was dumb. And I remember at one point I realized, like, there are companies that want to hire, like we would lose a deal. Like, we need 30 people tomorrow and you don't have 30 people, right? I'm like, you're right. So we were never going to get that deal anyway, but we got a lot of business because someone didn't want 30 people, right? They wanted a small set of specialists who were going to go solve a particular problem and not just run up the billing on them and so on and so forth, right? All our advantages we were hiding by covering it up with BS. So it's like, let's just be who we are. Right? We have to be good. We have to deliver. We have to be professional, of course. Hopefully that's who we are. But let's not pretend that we're something we're not. And gosh, it's just so much more relaxing because I'm not having conversations with people who need a team of 100 for 6 months offshore or whatever, right? I'm having a conversation with people who are somewhat in my zone.
You're finding your people instead of just finding people. And
yes.
We think early on that we have to like pretend to be something else. And a lot of the like, I don't know, the more generic kind of marketing and sales content will be like, look at your competitor and be like them. And it's like, no. Think instead about who you are and what you do and just be that, because then you're going to find the people that are looking for that. Turns out it's a really busy marketplace, and there are definitely people that are looking for exactly what you have to sell. You just have to be clear enough so that they can find you.
Right. And most of us who are struggling with these issues, we're small enough that we don't need, $100 billion a year for a market to make us successful, right? You can always get broader as you get bigger. And that's not a problem, but for right now, make it as easy as possible on yourself. And one of the realizations I had is, how do you know if you're focused enough on the target market? And it's when sales feels too easy.
Yeah.
Right? Like if you just know everything because it's like you're the doctor who's seen 1,000 of these cases before, right? Maybe you want to challenge yourself and go a little broader. But if you're sitting there struggling because you're not sure, and you don't have quite the right rapport with your audience, then it's time to focus a little bit more.
Yeah.
No, I think you hit something really kind of quickly in there that I think is worth calling out too. And that's the relationship building with people. It's, you cut out the BS. You are your authentic self. Your product is what it is, but there are always tricks and tips and tactics and stuff like that. And those have a place in negotiation to a point. They have but where they really have a place, I think, is in getting your foot in the door. Once you've made contact with whoever your decision maker is, the tips and tricks. There we go. Those tips and tricks kind of have to go out the window, and you just have to be person to person. Yeah. You have to make sure that this is somebody who, and people have said this before, people buy from people, they don't buy from whatever. I mean, I know I've bought products that were less because I liked the salesperson more. Mm-hmm. And that happens all the time. And especially if you're dealing with a very high level, I mean, that happens at the tiny startups as much as it does at the big corporate Fortune 100s. If you aren't your authentic self, which means you're someone that is comfortable to be around, is comfortable in their own skin, and has the confidence of knowing that, why should anyone give you the time of day? It's kind of an interesting thing there. And obviously you've had years, you figured it out, you've gone through all that. I think kind of the other side of this is, what do you wish? I think kind of the other thing I mentioned is, you come from the software background. You mentioned one of your first experiences in sales early on was, you promised the client what?
Right.
what do you wish salespeople knew about the other parts of the company? Like, how can we be better friends with the software engineers, with the sales engineers, with the, these other parts of the company? How can we better set you guys up for success as well, having been on the other side?
I think that's the $1 zillion question that companies across the world are always trying to tinker with and figure out. And I think a lot of it has to do with what are the incentives. And if the sales reps' incentives are close the deal, get the check, and move on to the next one, that's very different than close the deal, get a check. But by the way, your compensation is going to come over time as the customer becomes successful. All right, really, whether it's because everyone can have tunnel vision, right? Software people can, and I know this from personal experience as well, right? I can be in a little world writing code that doesn't necessarily help somebody either. And I might think I'm working really hard, but if I'm not making customers more successful, what's the point, right? And I think part of what's helpful about the path that I've wandered is I've always tried to think about where are we actually trying to get to for the customer? And what do we need from a sales perspective, from a technology perspective, from a services perspective to get them there? And that was sort of the whole premise of why I started consulting, because I was irritated that not only when I was at the software company, sure, the sales reps might promise something, but that was based on some slide deck that some big 5 or 4 consulting firm had left with a client. Like, you should do all these 18 things, send out an RFP, right? And then the sales reps say, of course we do all these 18 things because otherwise we get rejected from the RFP, right? It's sort of like a silly song and dance that everyone goes through. And I didn't want to do that. I was like, well, what if we could think about all these things together, right? The strategy, the technology, the business process. And we don't necessarily have to be an A+ on all those things, but gosh, if we could be like a B, but everything's aligned together, that would be so much better than having A+ going in different directions. But a lot of the way that we compensate people and we promote people, it's like, it's much better to get it scored an A+ because you closed a big deal than getting a B because you closed something that took a little longer or is less money, but is really going to make the customer successful. And I don't know what the magic answer for that is.
So I absolutely love everything you're saying about this sense of alignment and this sense of, serving others and doing it kind of together. And I want to pivot a little bit because something that was really striking to me about what you've shared with us is also your passion for not just helping your customers, but helping others more generally. And you mentioned, the fact that you recognize that if you're listening to this podcast or you're on this podcast, we are incredibly lucky, incredibly fortunate. And there needs to be sort of a recognition of that and a sense of gratitude for that. But what was also striking to both of us is that you really talked about the work that you do and the way you look at yourself as a leader, how you engage with your community, to recognize that there's opportunities to help lift others up as well. And I would love for you to just share a little bit about, as you transitioned into this role as a leader and as your business has grown and the role that you play in kind of the broader community, business community and home community has evolved. How do you approach lifting others up and doing good in your world and in your circle?
Great question. And, I don't know whether I deserve all of the praise you just gave me, but my ego feels very good. I think, like you say, we're very lucky, and I try to remember that, right? It's natural in human psychology to think about people who are luckier and more privileged than you are, about the things that are wrong. That's just kind of how most people are wired. And I think those things are all important, but it's also really important to be like, gosh, we have a lot of great stuff going on, even in the midst of all this craziness. Imagine if we didn't have the internet, right? Imagine if we couldn't sequence RNA. There'd be much more serious problems that prior generations faced, and that people who maybe don't live in the United States or don't have the background we have. And then I think as part of my work, one of the things I realized was, for a long time when I struggled with sales and I struggled with marketing, I was like, well, I'm the only one. I'm just dumb, right? Like, I'm smart at some things, but I'm dumb at these things. And I realized over time, no, I just haven't practiced, and I had the wrong mindset about it that was preventing me from being successful. And we kind of covered a lot of that earlier. But then I realized, wait a second, I'm not the only one, right? So many people have these same obstacles. And in a way, I was like, oh, that's a bummer, man. And a lot of us who are really kind of hosed like this, or, you know, we're hurting ourselves. But at the same time, I was like, okay, great. Here's a set of people that I can really help, because I really like working with a small business owner more than the Fortune 500 company. Doesn't necessarily pay as well, but you can really change someone's life in a much more direct way, right? So people who are like, hey, thanks, I really appreciate what you did and helping me have the confidence to know that I had to double my prices. And every time I look at the new patio that paid for, I really appreciate it. And so it seems silly. It's certainly not curing cancer or curing coronavirus or anything like that. But I feel like there's a whole bunch of talent out there that's doing things to help, but is constrained by the same mental roadblocks that I faced. Yeah. And so all I'm trying to do is help those people take the roadblocks off their own road so that they can go do their thing and perform their genius and go help people. And hopefully this kind of goes around in a virtuous cycle.
I love that.
Yeah, I'm sitting here just enjoying it. I love virtuous cycle. I like that as a phrase. That's just pretty. You know, I think it's really, really true. And you said this earlier, you know, I have, you know, at least at the end of every day, I have great conversations and I learn things. And that's one of the things that keeps me going. And sometimes that involves exchanging money and sometimes it doesn't. That's okay. I think it's really interesting too, to hear that acceptance of, this is my market. This is what I'm good at. This is what I enjoy. So we see this a lot with people, I think, especially early in their careers. Okay, I'm going to be an SDR, then I'm going to be an AE, and then I'm going to move into the field, and then I'm going to be a VP of sales, and then I'm going to be the CEO of the company. And it's just this almost tunnel vision on the ladder that they're going to be climbing. And there's a lot to be said for finding your spot and just being the master of your domain. And there's confidence that comes with it. There's security that comes with that. And yeah, are you going to be driving? Are you going to have the penthouse in New York City? Probably not. But is that what you really want? So I'm kind of curious there, as you're settling in and building your business and stuff, like what was your thought process around, okay, what matters to me? How do I know what I need right now? And then how does that evolve? Because that's something I think a lot of people struggle with, is figuring that sort of thing out.
Sure. And I did a really bad job of it. So once again, like my whole life is an instruction manual for things, how not to do things. But, you know, I got married, I had kids, and, you know, we were kind of trying to figure out how this would work because I was on the road all the time consulting, and we were like, oh, we could figure it out. And then we had twins. And so.
No big deal.
Yeah. And
a wrench in the plan.
Yeah, that threw a wrench in the plan. And I was like, I've vowed that I wouldn't miss my kids grow up. And here I am getting on a plane. So I finished the project that I was on, and then I shut down the traveling consulting. And that was kind of crazy because that's basically what we did. And, you know, I tried to do some virtual stuff and some local stuff, and that was fine too, but it was definitely right. You're dramatically shrinking your market. But I'm kind of like, if I don't make money, if I don't have the penthouse in New York, my life is fine. If I miss my kids growing up, unless I'm curing cancer or coronavirus, I didn't know about the coronavirus at the time, right? So I didn't have that as an option. Like, there's no good reason for me to be doing that. I need to structure a business that lets me be present for my kids. And so the CRM and the SaaS stuff kind of came out of that. So like, how can I take what I've learned, package it up in technology so that other people can take advantage of it, and so that I have some control over my schedule, so that I can, you know, when they were little, I used to make them breakfast and help them get dressed and all that stuff. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. And even now they're a little older and they don't necessarily want to hang out with me as much. But I don't want to be gone all the time. So I've deliberately set up my business to be time flexible and space flexible. I thought it was space flexible till we're all in the house together. That's not always ideal, but it still works reasonably well. And so the other thing I realized is, at first I was a little nervous to share this with people. Like, are they going to think it's weird when they call and they have a question because they can't close a deal because there's some, ambiguity in my software? What should I do next? And I'm like holding a kid and a frying pan, and, like, that doesn't seem very professional, right? And at some point I was like, this is what it is. Let me be open about it. And I feel like you can do, and especially like this is, right, it's not just me. I feel like even over the past decade, this has become much more prevalent, right? People working from home, people juggling their kids' schedules, people having to cancel a meeting for a doctor's appointment because their kid is sick or whatever. Like, we as a society have gotten much better at that. And all I did was say, okay, I'm going to own up to that. And it's been great because now I have all these awesome conversations with people about that. It's another thing that we can connect on just because we're being authentic. And it doesn't necessarily even mean, like, some folks don't even have kids. They don't have exactly the same struggle, but they know they're talking to another person, and that I care very deeply about their business problem and their strategies, and that I have these other things going on in my life, right? So if I didn't respond to their email right away, they know it's not because I'm some jerk who's blowing them off. It's because I have a life too.
Context is everything.
Truly. And I think that's the one of the few upsides to this whole coronavirus shelter in place kind of experience is, I think, the ability to keep your personal life hidden is it's a lot harder. And we're having a lot more of these calls where dogs bark, children burst in, we're in our sweats, we're at home, like we're a lot more real. Mm-hmm. And it's something that I don't think we're going to be able to come back from this. I don't think we're ever going to be able to go back to super professional all the time and pretending like I'm a different person at work than at home. And I think there's something really beautiful about that, and something that I'm hoping we kind of hold on to, of being a lot more understanding that people have complicated lives, and that's not a detriment. It's not a weakness. There's actually an advantage, right? Like, the things you go through with your kids, the things you go through at home, it makes it easier for you to empathize with your clients. It makes it easier for you to connect. It gives you like a richness of perspective that is an advantage, not a weakness. And I think my hope anyway is that this experience is going to help us as a culture, as a society, and as an industry kind of evolve and be a little bit more understanding and a little bit more human.
And I want to piggyback on that a little bit too, because I think it's not just helping us be more human and understanding context and everything, especially given, I mentioned this earlier with the nerd thing. I think enabling people to lean into who they really are is really going to make them better, authentic, more human beings as a whole, because you talk about finding more ways to connect with people. It's great to connect with people and be like, hey, we're both, like, for example, before we jumped on this call, Reuben and I discussed, I have, and he is getting a Corona puppy. So we're bonding over
That's right.
the active and imminent sleep deprivation. But at the same time, there's also a lot of subcultures and passion projects and things that we all have because we're all complex human beings. And bringing those in, even in small amounts, to your work makes you better at your job. And the story I tell a few people is I have a set of Pez dispensers that sit on my desk. They have since I got my first sales job. And I was selling network security. So nerd, I have Geordie LaForge, Data, and Wharf, because it made sense to me to bring the head of engineering, the head of security, and the head of ops to my sales position. So I'd have my technical support backup behind me. And the IT guys and the engineers in the office, they saw this stuff on my desk, and I immediately was able to establish rapport and a common communication with the more technical members of my staff, because we immediately devolved into which Trek is the best Trek, and is Star Wars really sci-fi or is it fantasy, and did Han Solo shoot first? Of course he did, and all these other little fun nerd debates that we all love to have. And then I started bringing those sort of conversations into my sales conversations, because I'm selling to IT engineers. It's a lot of the same sort of stuff. Bringing these things in, and even aside from that, like occasionally like being able to notice a photo in the background on a Zoom call and going, oh, I recognize that place. I've been there too. Or, I'm so jealous you have a signed poster from this band that I also love. Bringing that little bit of personal connection, it's everything. And it's really exciting now, I think too, especially as nerd culture becomes more mainstream. It's exciting that people feel more comfortable saying, yeah, of course I'm into Star Trek. Yeah, of course I'm into Doctor Who. Of course I'm into these Dungeons and Dragons and stuff like that. I've actually hired, for the record, I've hired several dungeon masters. I think that's what they're called, for the D&D things that they do, the role-playing games. Fabulous salespeople, because they are the best storytellers.
Great point.
So, I never got into that, but I think if I had, I would have been really good at it. But it's great to see these passions come in, and it's great to see these words destigmatized. So I really, really, really just want to say thank you for calling yourself a sales nerd and having yourself be the chief nerd on the Sales Nerd podcast. And that's another thing I want to talk about is, tell us a little bit about, podcasters supporting podcasters. Tell us about that project. What are you guys doing over there?
Well, in some ways it's similar to this. It's like, hey, all these folks who are nerdy and think sales isn't for them, but suddenly need to sell, usually because they started a company. Like, here's how you do it without making a mess of yourself and your sales and your company. And so I think it's a similar concept and really appreciate what you're doing as well, because I think we're sort of overall we've got similar philosophies. And really what it was, I was feeling a little just beat up by the grind. And I realized that I would get asked to go, can I buy you coffee and pick your brain for an hour? That kind of thing. I was like, I would love to do that, but it's just kind of a bad use of time usually. So I thought, well, I should, I kind of know what a lot of the questions are. I should write a book. And we'll get to that in a second. But at some point I was drinking wine and hanging out with some buddies who also were small business owners. And we were talking about how, if we were millennials, we'd figure out how to monetize this conversation on YouTube Live or Facebook Live or something, right? We're just too old and we don't know how that works. I was like, well, wait a second.
I am a millennial and I don't know how that works.
If you figure it out, let me know, because that would be great.
Yeah, definitely.
But I was like, instead of writing a book, what if I just do a podcast? And because it's my podcast, I can do what I want. What's to stop me from showing up with a bottle of wine and doing an interview? And it'll be super fun. And it still took me 6 months from realizing that to actually having my first interview, just because I was like, okay, if I wait for this thing to be perfect, it's never going to happen. And so I emailed Jason Cohen, the founder of WP Engine and a couple other successful companies. Hey, I'm a customer. I'm a huge fan of your blog and blah, 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 blah. This whole, it was all true, but very much like kissing up to this guy. And, mentioned I'm starting this new podcast. I bring a bottle of wine, blah, blah, blah. And he just wrote back, you had me at wine. Here's a link to my calendar. And so we did an interview. It was like 2 hours long. We only stopped because we ran out of wine. It was absolutely fantastic. The sound quality and editing is terrible, but it was great. And I was like, this is super fun. And I had so many people tell me, the sound quality is really terrible, but it was still worth listening to. So, after a while, I hired someone to edit it and to do it a little bit more professionally. But that's the basic idea. And at some point, I am going to write the book. I've had a number of authors on the show naturally. And one of them was like, hey, where's your book? Sales for Nerds would make a great book. And I was like, oh, busy, blah, 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 young kids. Or he's like, well, let me tell you when I wrote my book and how old my kids were, and, this, that, and the other thing. And, we were a glass or two in at this point. So I was like, okay, I will write the book. And since then I have not done anything. So Adam, I'm sorry. I'm trying to get there. If I can get some stability here after this, I'm sure with this puppy, it'll be great. There'll be a lot of extra time and I can get to writing the book. But that's kind of the project. It's just fun stuff. And I think like 90% of the episodes are me interviewing someone. And then every once in a while, like every 10 or 20 episodes, I do like just a solo, here's stuff to talk about.
Reubens rants.
Yeah, basically.
Absolutely love it. So, and we will, anybody that's listening, we will include link to the podcast in the show notes. So everybody should go give a listen.
Absolutely.
And nerd out, obviously. So, okay, this has been an incredible interview. The way we wrap these up is we ask a series of sort of rapid fire questions. Don't think too hard. Some are a little bit more serious. Most are kind of silly. And so to kick it off, what's your morning routine?
In theory or in practice?
Maybe both.
In theory, I get up at 6, I meditate, I have some coffee, I work out, I make sure I have an exact plan for the day with all of my critical to-dos laid out in my task manager in my calendar. And I see my kids off to school and I get to them. In practice, what has been happening lately is that I'm waking up around 7. I'm doing like 60 seconds of meditation. The coffee is still there. And then it's like, okay, let me catch up on the deluge of stuff that I'm trying to sort out and prioritize, and that I really need to get done during the 4 hours my kids are in virtual class. So it's a little bit less structured than I would like. And one of the things that I learned is, maybe it's okay just to be kind to myself on this one for a week or two more.
I think everybody's morning routine kind of got a little screwed up during this whole shelter in place experience. I know mine did.
Yeah.
I ran out of coffee. I had to switch to tea. I've ordered some. It'll get here soon. All right.
An emergency.
That's a disaster.
Well, to be fair, I ran out of the good coffee. I do have backup coffee. It's just really not as good. Yeah, no, there is no way. It's just the tea gets drunk more throughout the day because that tastes better than the bad coffee. All right. Pick one person who has had a significant impact on your career.
Gosh, that's so funny. I'm filling out this interview response and I have it all filled out except for that question. And I don't know what the right answer is. I was going to write my kids actually in that one, just because they're such a good check on like, am I doing the right thing and not just like doing what everyone says you're supposed to do. But I don't know, because I've done so many weird things. I didn't become the SDR and the AE and the VP and the whatever. I kind of wandered around, and I feel like there's so many people I'm grateful for helping me. But I don't know if there's like one person that I would say, oh, it's them. That there isn't like, I never feel like I know what the heck I'm doing until I get there and figure it out. Right. Like some people are like, oh, I had this mentor and they got me into whatever and it was great. I show up and I'm like, huh? Yeah. And then I figure it out.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's your pump up song?
Oh man, that's a great one. And it varies tremendously, like week by week, day by day. For a while, the Rolling Stones were coming to Austin in May, and we were going to go see them. And so I was listening to a lot of Give Me Shelter. Lately, I've been listening to a lot more Ventilator Blues by the Rolling Stones. It seems more appropriate. But
I love the dark humor.
A great song for any times, but
yes.
Especially relevant now. It really depends a lot. I'm one of those people, like I have a song in my head and I'll listen to it on repeat like 20 times in a week and drive everyone around me crazy. And the next week I'm like, I don't need that one anymore. I'm onto this other one.
Yeah.
All right. What's one thing you wish you'd learned earlier?
That I was where I needed to be and that I didn't have to be somewhere or someone else, and that it was okay to be exactly where I was, right? Especially we've talked about all the sales stuff, but I think on so many levels that was true.
Okay. I know eventually it will be your own, but right now, what's your favorite sales book?
Gosh, that is a great question too. Let me turn around on my bookshelf here. I like Sell More Faster by Amos Schwartzfarb. He was on the show recently. What am I trying to think of? Spin Selling is a classic, of course. But I feel like all of these books, they're great if you have the right mindset, but they also screwed me up when I read them before I had the right mindset, if that makes sense. Yeah. It was like, if I was going to go climb Mount Everest or something, and I read a book about climbing Mount Everest and tried to do it, it would be miserable because I don't have the basic whatever that you need to do that. So definitely get your head in the right place first, and then you can take the right stuff out of all these books.
I like that.
That's so true. All right. What's one way someone could have been a better ally to you?
Not promising the customer that thing that they promised them.
Stop promising the roadmap.
Okay. What's one way you're working to be a better ally to others?
I think I'm getting a lot better at this. And, maybe I'm just better at deluding myself, but I think I'm getting better at being patient with people who maybe don't conform to my immediate expectations. It's kind of like, it's great to have the Star Trek figurines on your desk to indicate, hey, I'm not what you think of when you think of network security, but I know this stuff. But why do you have to have the figurines there? Right. And so I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm trying to be patient enough with people that they can share their story with me. And instead of realizing, gosh, I'm in such a rush to kind of check off these boxes, it kind of goes back to what you were saying, Ashleigh, about those other forms of connection, right? Like we need, as human beings, not as business people, but as human beings, we need that kind of connection. And not only do we make other people feel crappy if we try to rush through that stuff, but we deprive ourselves of something essential. So I'm trying to do a better job of not, scheduling everything back to back and rushing, and like just letting people talk and learning about them and learning what their stories are. And it's been amazing.
That's lovely.
It really is. All right. I think I know the answer to this, but what's your guilty pleasure after a bad day?
What's my answer?
Well, we mentioned wine earlier, so I'm assuming there's some wine involved.
Yeah, that's the. let's just say that at least that part of the economy I'm supporting.
You've got the wine, I've got the gin.
Right. Okay.
I was gonna say, what's your favorite type of wine?
Again, it varies, but I probably drink a fair bit of like California Pinot, and then there's some French reds that I like to drink. And, you never know, depending on what you're eating or how hot it is outside, what you might want to consume. But I'm told that it's great for longevity. So, you may not like the taste, but you've got to take care of your health.
Yeah. Health matters. Absolutely.
In these crazy times, in these challenging times.
Your daily dose of vitamins.
Right.
Exactly.
Well, thank you so much for this. This was a fantastic interview. I think we all learned a lot. And as we said at the beginning, we love talking about the nerdy side and talking about these sort of unconventional journeys to sales, because there's a lot we can learn from those. And so really appreciate you sharing all of this. We will, of course, include links to all of your things in the show notes. Mm-hmm. And so everybody check out the podcast. I'm really excited for it. And of course, if you liked this episode, please leave us a review, share it with your friends. And as always, if there's anything that Ashleigh or I can do for anybody listening, or if you've got an idea for a good topic or someone we should interview, hit us up on social, LinkedIn, Twitter, all the places. And thanks for listening.